Embercleave.
See? Told you.
Oh, and there it is. Yes, that is a nice little hand. You've got those snowlands, a snowman land, and a couple of little creatures to start things out.
Yep. Really wants a 2 or free drop of any kind. Because, Fireblade Charger is fine, but you really want anything. Anything would help. Because otherwise Cifka gets to kind of get a lot of time since not a ton of damage comes through. And then you get to leverage your Omen of the Seas. We might see Valky come down, just because it can proactively get rid of a free drop like this Annex. And sure, Valky might go, but that's enough tempo.
Oh, and there's an extinction event being drawn by Cifka. That is a good way to slow down Mono Red, who really plays a lot on the odds. You see right now on the board, we've got the champion, we've got the charger, we've got Annex in hand, all of which get exiled to the extinction event.
Yeah, and once you draw that card, there's no point in playing anything else. Extinction event, you didn't see a 2-drop that would have gone and played that turn. So at that point, you're maybe worried about a free drop, and extinction event's so good that you want to accelerate. Cifka's like, yes, this is perfect.
Yeah, Santos is committed to the board, which is, the thing to do. You're mono red. You could win next turn on a good Embercleave. And now everything's gone. And Annex, who normally makes Satyr tokens when your creatures die, doesn't trigger here because those creatures are exiled. They are gone for good.
Yeah, and that was really brutal because there are 2 extinction events in the list, right? There's 80 cards, 2 events.
But there's
we saw that
there's also 2 Shadows verdicts, so we could see one of those. And that hits everything except for Torbran.
Yeah. However, Shadow's Verdict would have been much better because you would have at least gotten to deal a lot more damage in the meantime, and Embercleave might have hit the table as well. So, that's the difference, I think, between Extinction Event and Shadow's Verdict, and why this matchup generally favors Red is they need the card on time with the acceleration, and that can be quite difficult to achieve. But once they do that, once they achieve that goal of Ram plus mass removal, really, really hard for the mono red deck to come back. With Bernardo Santos here, by the way, choosing the Bone Crusher Giant over just attacking with a Faceless Haven, even though that's a clean hit, you're going to do that next turn anyways, and unless Cifka has literally 2 spot removal spells, you're getting that damage through.
And here comes the Elder Gargaroth. And a Torbran. Ooh, a nice top deck.
Yeah, it's pretty nice because it allows the Bone Crusher Giant to at least trade with the Elder Gargaroth, but even there, Cifka's fine with it. You can just take the 6 and then attack with Gargaroth, and you have spot removal off. This is looking really, really, really good for Cifka.
Yeah, that extinction event is very much game swinging. You've removed the 3 on-curve creatures that got played. You've slowed things down. Santos only has 2 cards left in hand. They are good cards, but with that Heartless Act potentially next turn, Ultimatum maybe 2 turns away, it's going to be very rough for Santos to win from here.
Yeah, indeed. Like, you get to deal 6 probably here. I don't think Cifka blocks in this spot just because you get a free attack back with removal up, and that that's the promise of more Gargaroth triggers, so I'm not surprised here to see Cifka just take the 6.
Yeah, you could, I don't know, maybe draw a card, maybe make a 3/3. Probably don't need to gain 3 life, but you can always be a little proactive.
Yep. So the main advantages to drawing a card is you want that extra land for Emergent Ultimatum. If you're not too worried about, though, the free does give you board presence, and the free is really relevant in the face of Faceless Haven and Bone Crusher Giant.
Yeah, being able to say, I'll trade with your land is a strong move. And this is going to be the gift of information. Valky taking a peek at Santos's hand and seeing an Embercleave, which means that now Cifka can play around. Oh, I know that there's an Embercleave. I'll just go ahead and take out this and, hold up my 2 mana here. I get to swing in with Elder Gargaroth, choose to make a beast, and even an Embercleaved up Bone Crusher Giant does not scare him.
Yep, and that's why you see also Cifka not keep up the Heartless Act for a potential Embercleave. It's just like, okay, it happens. Well, I'll block with my Gargaroth. I'll, take some damage, but I'm at least, I can gain the life back if I need that. Let's see here. This would be 10 -6. So putting Cifka down to 3. Yeah. Obviously, this is good, right? Just make sure you draw your card first. You get the information. I think I'd trade the Gargaroff here and maybe gain life because I feel Cifka's quite ahead. But we'll see what. Oh yeah, now for sure you got your last land for Emergent Ultimatum. So, as long as this Bone Crusher Giant gets blocked by Gargaroff and an option is chosen, it should be fine.
There we're seeing the block. It hasn't been locked in yet. We might see that 3/3 beast get thrown in front too, just to prevent more face damage.
Yeah, that seems fine. Ultimatum, less. You don't get Vorinclex, so it's a little. Cifka's deck is less on Ultimatum winning the game directly, and more on Ultimatum will eventually win me the game anyways. So I don't. So I can go for value instead.
Yeah, that Ultimatum might end up replacing the Gargaroth that we see on the board here. And we saw before, lots of good hits in the deck.
This is effectively the same as gaining free life and not blocking with the beast, by the way. But it's fine. Like both options, it's as long as you pick an option and you cast your Emergent Ultimatum and get some relevant cards, not too much. Nothing too horrible can happen here.
I also love having a Pelucranos to follow up with in the future, because Pelucranos and just fighting those small creatures from mono red can be a great way to have long-term board control.
Yeah, Pelucranos is a really good card in a lot of spots. It is a little weak to Stomp specifically because of how those two cards interact. But the blocker is gigantic, and the fact that it can get rid of the utility creatures really nice, makes it a really nice card. It makes Embercleave look a lot worse too.
So as far as small bits of life gain go in the deck to help stabilize, there is that inclusion of Professor Onyx, and we see that Cifka did grab it there. Onyx has a Magecraft ability, which means whenever you cast or copy an instant or sorcery, you will be triggering this ability. In this case, it is you gain 2 life and your opponent loses 2 life.
Yeah, and this is a really hard spot. At 14, if you give the Time Walk and the Chariot, I think that should be lethal or very close to it. If you give the Chariot and Onyx, I mean, the Onyx doesn't really do anything specifically this turn. It'll be for future turns. But the board is like ultra gummed up now. There's like a ton of blockers.
So losing a life there to Professor Onyx's +1 and drawing a land.
Yeah. So, I mean, yeah, Robber of the Rich can deal 6 damage. And down the line, Faceless Haven is an out of kind of an on-board 10. If there's a land draw next turn. I don't think there's much Bernardo Santos can do apart from just casting Robber and equipping it. There is a line where you cast the Robber, don't equip it, and hope that the card you get off it is incredible. I'm not sure what the card would be, though. Extinction Event would get rid of the board. Extinction Event would be
rude, but you'd also kill your own Robber.
I mean, if you're attacking with a 2/2 into that board, I suspect it's going to go away. But yeah, you'd have to hit like the one Extinction Event, which, I mean, very unlikely.
Well, I do love to see what does get exiled here. What's being stolen? It is actually Shadow's Verdict, another board wipe in this scenario. But there wouldn't have been enough mana to play it anyway.
Yep. Here you can trade with the Chariot and block with the Beast token to absorb the excess trample damage. This is looking like 9, so if Cifka can find free spells, which seems unlikely to get right away.
So when you see this Professor Onyx Planeswalker, do you usually think of her as Liliana? Or do you think, oh, Professor Onyx, that's the name of the card?
Liliana. Straight up.
Like, I'm not even... is.
Yeah, no, I can't imagine as anything that isn't Liliana.
I'm just imagining the future where it said an alternate type line of Anna Iora on the card. Would have been good. All right, so here comes that Polukranos, and we're going to see some ramp from Cultivate.
Yeah, probably because a land anyways would make Faceless Haven 10. It's effective 10 power with trample. But you have a 6/6. You don't need to keep the fight up here. So honestly, as long as Cifka survives, the game will end. So I'm no attacks, nothing really horrible can happen. We're just gonna go to game 2 very shortly here, I believe.
Yeah, there is not a line which wins for Santos. And we are going to game 2, with the first win going to the Sultai Ultimatum deck piloted by Cifka.
Yep. So we're getting the hot technology about how this sideboard is. So Cifka, boarding in spot removal, Gargaroffs, and taking out marginal cards, Mystical Dispute, not really for this matchup. And Santos, boarding in the Roiling Vortex, which, if you remember the match between, with Yuza, really important card. And then the Akron War, because again, if you're seeing Elder Gargaroffs and Polukranos, you need the Akron War to kind of go through, and you have 4 Frostbites that are almost pretty straight up dead cards. There is an Embercleave being boarded out, but just pretend I didn't hear that. I know some sensibilities may be offended by that one.
We can still believe in the Cleave with only 2 copies or 3 copies left.
3 copies, yeah.
That's plenty of Embercleave. Listen, it's legendary. You can't have 2 out at a time. I understand not needing all 4 of them at any given time.
Yeah, that's fair. You just draw it when you need it, right? That's how Embercleave works.
It shows up, I'd say, 80% of the time when you dread it showing up.
Yes. It's almost, it's almost companion-esque. Those extinction events, always in the opener, it feels so rough, like from the aggro player's perspective, because this is open deckless. You know fully what your opponent has. So when they play that, that turn-free extinction event, it's just like, come on.
Right? Like, it feels so good when you're just playing your aggro deck. You're up against an opponent. They haven't really done anything on turn 1, turn 2, turn 3. And then there's an extinction event. Last game, it happened on turn 3 because there was a little bit of ramp happening. But it's just like, oh, yes, I might win next turn. I've got their life total so low. And never mind, there's an extinction event.
Yeah. And it would have been very different, right, without the ramp, too. Or if that card was Shadow's Verdict, because then the Anax is a ton of damage, so you have to kill it. But then there's tokens. So like, that game was completely different. Had it been Shadow's Verdict, or had Bernardo Santos not faced Extinction Event through ramp. Like, I think the mono-red player would have been able to square it out just because of that Faceless Haven being in play.
So we're seeing a pre-attack Anax come down to make sure that the Robber of the Rich steals a card. You have to have fewer cards in your hand than your opponent in order to get this thieving effect. Robber of the Rich, of course, being a rogue. A rogue archer, I believe. That's why it has reach.
The Heartless Act can be quite a nice pickup. I don't think it'll happen with this Robber, but a future Robber of the Rich, you can Heartless Act and then kill a Elder Gargaroff. And this is really nice because you're playing around Extinction Event here. I mean, if you get rid of Even, which is fine, I mean, you still have Anax, Stomp, and yeah, this is looking like mono red plans, and we're good. Okay, good life, good. So we're having from the production crew, we have a message. We'll be back in a second while we get things sorted out. It turns out Bernardo Santos' aggression was so rapid that production has to keep up with the light speed drive that was installed by those red attacking creatures.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the League Weekend Strixhaven Split coverage. I'm Amy Amazonia here with Eduardo Sajalik, and we are going to go into Game 2 of the match in Round 3 between Cifka and Santos. Right now, there's one game up for Cifka in the Ultimatum deck, and one game up for Mono Red Aggro. We saw a very, very quick Game 2 there.
Yeah, that was blisteringly fast. And I mean, that's why this matchup can be rough for Sultai Ultimatum is, if you're on the draw and your opponent curves out and you don't have that turn-free extinction event, well, it's going to be tough. Now, next game, Cifka does get to be on the play. So the class of hands that allows Cifka to win the game is much larger. And I think we're going to have a much more interesting game 3 where it's going to be less dependent on either a specific card from either player and going to be more about, can Bernardo Santos kind of leverage a board position where Cifka can't, for example, ultimatum and lock down the game. So it is going to be a lot closer here. And, oh, yeah, I love this. Let's go, Raging Goblin.
Ooh, we got the Hall Monitor hidden face for one.
Yeah. That I really love these 1/1s with haste with something else. Like, Raging Goblin is obviously too weak, a magic card to really see play, although it was considered too powerful at one point. And I love little abilities like that make them relevant in the late game. So Fireblade Charger, doesn't have haste but does ping something. Hall Monitor makes it hard for something like a Pulukronos or an Elder Gargaroth.
So we saw Cifka do some ramping there, and we're going to see Santos curving here. So we had the turn 1 Hall Monitor, the turn 2 Robber, hidden face. Of course, with Mono Red on the draw, it's a little harder to do that stealing. But if this curves out, there's going to be an Anax into an Embercleave coming up soon.
Yep. And I mean, to be fair, Cifka does have the tools to counter that, right? You have access to Eliminate and Heartless Act. And we kind of saw this decision, by the way, when we saw, right? Paulo had it with free mana for the Cultivate, rather than Cifka getting to keep 2 cards up, which makes the call a lot closer. But we see Cifka deciding to go for a Cultivate here, rather than keeping up the interaction. Kind of taking a reverse call to Paulo's.
And whatever was on top, I think it may have been a land, got scryed to the bottom there, which means that Santos is not facing a board wipe, Extinction Event, or Shadow's Verdict in hand.
Yeah. And to be fair, you're considering the Shadow's Verdict. I don't think you can't just play Faceless Haven and Anax. You can consider it, but I don't see how you don't make that play this turn, because anything else seems far too weak. So you kind of have to just go with it.
Make them do the pre-combat removal, play around the Embercleave. That's going to be a strong move.
Yeah. We're going to see a foreshadowing of an interesting decision next turn, depending on how the removal lines up and the timing. So obviously there's Embercleave, and you can time it and play it on a creature, but into a bunch of open mana, it's always a little risky. Now, the thing is, you also have access to Roiling Vortex. You can't really cast both, but Roiling Vortex is kind of immune to most things that Cifka could do. So casting that and stopping an ultimatum that would come next turn does just seem a lot safer, right? You don't risk losing to essentially spot removal into ultimatum. And considering your opponent has gone ramp, no interaction, ultimatum's very high on your list of priorities. So while it looks a lot less exciting, Roiling Vortex is probably the right call over Embercleave. Which means
there's the potential for like the swing in and no good removal getting played. Well, listen, just because they're the best players doesn't mean that they don't always use their removal. Okay, well, no, we're going to see that Roiling Vortex. We see that the mana get hovered.
Yeah, and you kind of play it pre-combat, right? Because otherwise, if you believe Cifka has a removal spell, you're supposed to play this pre-combat because that's an extra card off Robber of the Rich, potentially. You could always hit an Omen of the Sea, and that's like
that would be a great card. Get some card draw.
Yeah, and yeah, Santos played this correctly. Identified, look, end of the day, I'm not going to lose removal spell into ultimatum. It's just too likely to happen here. Not going to take the risk.
And we're going to see the Anax killed first, because Anax does have this passive ability, generating the 1/1 Satyr tokens. And then the second piece of removal going on Robber of the Rich. There will be no thievery today.
Yep.
I do like the Hall Monitor getting in for 1 damage. And that Emergent Ultimatum, if it is cast, will end up dealing some damage because of the Roiling Vortex.
Yeah, you can ultimatum for 2 spells, I believe, because you may cast
I think
them.
It's up to 3.
Yeah, well, I think you can just you can make. I believe it's may cast. I'm trying to remember the exact card, but you could ultimatum for essentially a spell. Taking 5 is possible here. Yeah, it says you may cast the other cards without paying the mana cost, so you don't have to. So one option here, because there is very little else, might be I can ultimatum for free cards. Bernardo Santos picks 1, and then you cast one of the other 2. If you cast both, you go to 1. I don't see which 2 cards you're casting where you get to live on and continue playing the game.
Well, you go to 1 and then you die from the vortex.
Right. I mean, you could find like something like Binding of the Old Gods and something else, but is that really winning you the game? And then you're at 1 against a Faceless Haven, a bunch of tokens. So I'm kind of interested to see what the approach is here. I think Cifka's going to try to get 1 spell cast, but I'm not 100%. Might as well activate
a possible preemptive activation. There's nothing else to do with the mana here.
It doesn't matter. The spells get cast, get to do it later. Yeah, this is actually kind of interesting. I don't think there's cards you could get. I mean, you could get something like Gargaroth and like 2 mass removal spells, but then like then Bernardo Santos goes like, well, I'll just give you the 2 removal spells, and then sure, you're dead. What was taken here? Nothing.
Wait.
Sorry?
What happened? He cast a spell. He selected, it looked like a Gargaroth and...
I'm kind of...
came out? Maybe he hit decline?
I don't normally read chat for these matches, but somebody said...
during his selection?
Yeah, someone timed out. I mean, okay. That's a thing. Okay, if you time out, you time out. Like, I don't know. Like, could have... I think basically didn't have access to a rope because some of the other turns had a rope. So had no ropes to give.
You can see he has 0 timeouts left. That is, in fact, going to be victory for Mono Red. Santos taking the win in round 3.
Yeah, and, I do want to give context here. At the end of the day, there was a Roiling Vortex, so the one card that would kind of get the job done, I don't know what it would have been. I guess you would have gotten something like Gargaroth and 2 mass removal spells. So then you just cast 1 of the mass removal spells, go to 6. which not a good position, but you can at least survive, even though there's Faceless Haven. But I'm not. It is still a bad position, right? You go from 11 to 6. You know next turn you're going to 5. So I don't know what card specifically Cifka could have gotten, because it had to be 2 separate cards. And it had to be a card on its own, most likely. So I don't think there was an out for Cifka there, but I might be wrong. But in any case, they're timed out, of course, so we'll not know.
I mean, if it'd be possible to get a replay to see what was happening during that selection process, it would be great. I mean, I didn't even notice that there were no timeouts left, but that does happen when you're making these big decisions. You can see there's the timer burning down at the bottom of the board. He had no timeouts left because he had been making decisions in previous turns. He has to scroll through an 80-card deck and gets burned out. He doesn't have the chance to cast the spells.
Okay, so there the selection was Gargaroth or Epiphany. The idea being that at 6 life, Gargaroth can work, but the problem is against Roiling Vortex, Gargaroth does nothing anyways because you could just prevent the life gain. So it would have at least been down to 4 and then down to 3. Still, Gargaroth might have been fine. Better than nothing, of course. But yeah, it would have been really hard to win. The Epiphany also would have just given an extra draw. Still, a spell would have been better than none, but in this case, that's what happened.
It's a rough way for the game to end, but it does happen. So I believe we'll be going to a break before we continue on in round 3. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the League Weekend coverage. I'm Amy the Amazonian here with Eduardo Sedgwick. We're about to watch a match from the Rivals League between Luca Magni and Corey Burkhart. So this is going to be actually a repeat of some of the decks we've seen earlier today, slightly different builds. We've got the Dragons Midrange deck. That's the Spells and Dragons heavy deck. And we've got Jeskai Cycling.
Yep, we saw this match earlier between Ray Sato and Brad Nelson. One of the things is Luca Magni's build is weaker to Improbable Alliance. But this is still, normally this is a good matchup for Izzet Midrange, and it really depends on Improbable Alliance. That card hits play, relatively easy game for Jeskai Cycling. I mean, we saw Brad essentially concede to that card on its own game 1, and there's no Cinderclasm post board. There are Ugins, the Spirit Dragon, that can maybe get there. But yeah, on the other side, the Jeskai Cycling player, you can't leverage really Flourishing Fox against Stomp, Frostbite, and Petty Theft. Valiant Rescuer, a big target. Now, that said, Improbable Alliance, it really is that card. It's actually incredible how dependent on one card this matchup is. Without the card, it's very easy for Izzet Midrange, and with it, it can swing in Jeskai Cycling's favor immediately. So, honestly, having looked at this match and how it plays out, I would probably aim to very aggressively mulligan to Improbable Alliance. If the hand is even, like, the first hand is, like, okay, but doesn't have Alliance, I'd probably just ship it to get to Alliance or something and be much more aggressive about it because of the power level of that card in this matchup.
Yeah, spitting out the 1/1 flyers to both block the dragons, get damage in, and generally clog up the board is a strong move for the cycling deck here. And this version of cycling uses these draw 2 payoff cards like Improbable Alliance and Ironcrag Pyromancer to keep the board under control. It's also using the more traditional cycling payoffs of Flourishing Fox getting bigger and bigger, a Draenith Stinger pinging the opponent. You've got the Rescuer making tokens on the ground and Zenith Flare as a finisher. But when you're up against an opponent that has some counter spells like Negate and Sot coming, you're going to have a harder time getting that to land.
Yeah, that's the thing. A Zenith Flare is a lot less important because we have these kind of counters, the counter spells you mentioned. And it's very easy for Luca Magni to keep those up because these dragons are generating mana. So that's the thing, is you don't actually tap out. You get these frets that allow you to kind of play this kind of control tempo game where somebody compared Goldspan Dragon to Fairy Hero of Dominaria, and it's actually not that far off a comparison. The biggest difference is the game lasts a lot less time.
Yeah, that's you don't have to mill your opponent out one painful card at a time while exiling them.
Yeah, I mean, the game lasts forever. There's multiple activations, whereas Goldspan Dragon, if that's in play for a couple of turns with the mana, like, either it's not a relevant card or it's ending the game. But, yeah, main card to keep an eye out, Improbable Alliance, post-board, not really an answer to it, but there are 2 Mystical Disputes, and especially those 2 Ugin the Spirit Dragons. But, on the other side, those negates are coming in, those disputes are coming in, stroke. So, really interesting match. We do have Improbable Alliance, and there is no counter magic in Luca Magni's hand, so this is looking great for Corey.
Ooh, yeah, that turn to Alliance can go uncontested.
Yeah.
Yep, well, there's a Brazen Borrower, so it might end up back in hand, but that still only gives a turn to get rid of it. And we see 2 Ironcrag Pyromancers as well. That's good, long-lasting damage on the board. They don't really function as blockers in this matchup. They would in many other matchups. They can block the 3/1s a tiny bit. If a Flourishing Fox stays small, then they can continue to block. But for the most part, they will die to some form of removal.
Yeah. I mean, because both players have Ironclad. There's Ironcrag Pyromancer on one side. On the other side, there's a bunch of cheap removal. No, going wide is exactly what these decks are weak to. Something like Naya tokens can actually be a little rough on Izzet Dragon. That's why, Clarion Spirit being your token maker. But, if they have Toski or something like that, it can be really problematic. They have Giant Killers. That's not the matchup, but it's just to give context as to, why this deck is powerful if you're thinking of facing Sultai Ultimatum or these one fret, one win decks like mono red. Like, Izzet Dragons looks great if your field is Sultai Ultimatum and mono red.
A few more people did bring cycling to this league weekend than I expected. A lot of people do sleep on it, especially if you're playing in, say, the arena ranked queue. You don't run into it as often as you might expect.
Yeah, I mean, the thing with the cycling deck is the power of it is quite secretive. I think a lot of people just keep underestimating it. It was like a deck that was really popular, obviously, when Ikoria released, because everybody wanted to try it. But I think because everybody tried it and hasn't retried this version with Improbable Alliance and Pyromancer, it kind of warped people's views on the deck. And it is really a meta call. At the end of the day, if you're facing a bunch of Gruul adventure decks, you don't want to be playing cycling. That sounds like a horrible time. It's a bad matchup. You don't want to do it. They're fast. They're quick. They have Love-Struck Beasts, which are exactly what you don't want to see when you're being beat down by that and other things. So that's also why you don't see it that much, I think, in the ladder is, like, at the end of the day, cycling's just not good against some of these aggressive decks.
Right there, we just saw a Scorching Dragonfire get used on a 1/1 token so the borrower could get in. That was damage being done when damage could be done. It is an odd situation when these 1/1 fairies are getting generated of, oh, do I use my deal 3 damage removal that exiles on that? It's almost feels embarrassing, but when you're just trying to get that damage in, you need to do it. And right now we're going to see the damage from the Irencrag Pyromancer get triggered on the draw 2, and it is going to take out the borrower, it looks like, leaving a 1/1 on the board.
Yeah, because from Corey's point of view, right, how do you lose the game? You know, random damage ticking in, and then the dragons with an Alrund's Epiphany taking over. So, you know, why do that? Why take this risk? You could literally just block here, play Pyromancer next turn, cycle Stinger, get rid of the dragon, and I just don't see how Luca Magni comes back.
I love having 2 bolts off those Pyromancers each turn.
Yeah, this is just looking like, you know, I think Correct Pyromancer is interesting in that it's not necessarily the best card in this matchup because a lot of the creatures you care about have 4 toughness. But, I mean, if it gets rolling here, like, you're not coming back.
What's relevant is that it has 4 toughness, too. Like, you see that Frostbite in hand? You know what it can't kill? Pyromancer.
Yeah, there's a lot of things. It could kill a fairy token.
Oh, yeah, you could kill your own fairy token.
It's wonderful. But, by the way, like, multiple Pyromancers do a good Zenith Flare impression.
Oh, and there's another Goldspan Dragon that is a strong card off the top, mostly because it can still swing in this turn, but it will likely die because with 4 cards in hand, it's almost guaranteed that there's a cycling card there. And even if there weren't, a land would mean activating the Improbable Alliance, which sometimes you end up doing. It's like, oh, God, I have all these dud cards in hand. They don't have cycling. There's nothing I can do. I don't want to play them. I'll just activate the ability to discard and draw off the Alliance.
Yep. Yeah, right. And in the late game, sometimes you know, hit such a glut of lands that can happen. But yeah, here you get to play another Pyromancer, and you get to deal 9 damage. And then down the line, if you have more cycling cards, you get to do that on each turn.
I think Irencrag Pyromancer in this match right here really tells the tale of what if Bolt was pay 1 mana, deal 3 damage, but also draw a card.
Yeah, that's the problem I have is draw a card.
It's so good. Like right here, Irencrag Pyromancer, if it gets played, you could cycle, say, Startling Development, deal your 9 damage. Oh my god, 9 damage. And then, if you draw a land that comes in untapped, you could do it again next turn.
Yeah. By the way, here the decision was to play the Pyromancer or not. Decides not to because you get to essentially do it on Luca Magni's turn. So that's 4 triggers rather than 3 total.
Yeah, because that land draw was, of course, not guaranteed. Did end up happening. And that's going to be so much damage. I am anticipating Corey's big burn here.
This is going to be really hard for Luca Magni to... Well, no, it's not going to be hard. It's going to be impossible. I guess, technically, if you drew exactly... How many Alrund's Epiphanies are in the deck? Let me check. So, there are 4. So, if you drew all 4 in a row...
If you drew Alrund's Epiphany, and then drew Alrund's Epiphany during that Epiphany turn, and then you drew another, and then you drew another, you would win off of tiny little token damage, probably.
Yeah. Fun fact with Alrund's Epiphany. If you play 4 in a row, it's exactly 20 damage.
Really? Ooh.
Yeah, 2, 4, 6, 8.
It's so nice that it exiles itself, so you don't have to worry about people recurring it from the graveyard. Look at you! Time Warp, that's currently in Historic.
Yeah. It's good. People should suffer a little bit to that card, as historically Magic players have.
As long as it's not Nexus of Fate, I'm happy.
Yeah, that's fair. But, yeah, here this is... this is no contest. Like, I mean, Corey could draw complete air, but it does seem unlikely.
Ooh, so let's see it happen. It's a cycle, another cycle. The second draw happens, Improbable Alliance triggers, the Ancrag Pyromancer's trigger, 3 damage to the Faceless Haven, 3 damage to face, and a fairy token all getting generated, which is leaving Corey with a very nice next turn, which would be 3 damage of attackers and I believe 9 damage of bolting.
Yep, can be 9, yep. So there's just not anything I can really have. Obviously, you're not attacking with these, but...
No, do it. Do it. It's a power move.
It's true. You can't even activate Faceless Haven. Yeah. Yep, so play the last one, and then you get to cycle, and if anything happens, you get to cycle again. Luca Magni's face is like, yeah, it looks good.
And we're going to see the Triome not actually get cycled because the concession comes from Luca first. And now we're going to move into sideboarding.
Yep. I kind of wonder how the sideboarding is, because we get the Spirit Dragon, not necessarily something you want when your opponent's boarding in, negate and disputes and stroke. But it's pretty much one of the cleanest possible answers to the whole engine, essentially. So I think you have to board those in and try to play. So yeah, and now we got the news from the floor. Somebody went and looked at the deck box. Petty Thefts come out. Brazen Bar, we're not surprised by that. 2 Epiphanies come out. Expensive spell. Assad coming. 2 Scorching Dragonfire. You have a lot of spot removal anyways. And those come, and the things that are coming in are Disputes, Red Cap Melee, Soulseer, Test of Talents, and 2 Igans. And really those 2 Igans, the Spirit Dragons, are the star of the show. Now, on Burkhart's side, just removing a bunch of random 1-mana cyclers, 2 Valiant Rescuers since they don't line up against spot removal, and actually deciding to keep 3 of the 4 Iron Crag Pyromancers because there is only 1 Red Cap Melee. So at that point, you don't have the issue of the Sato Brad Nelson match of trading down on mana, because there's just a lot less cleaner answers to that card, and it becomes more valuable. And of course, the Red Cap Melees, the Shredded Shells come in because they kill the dragons, negates dispute, stroke.
That's some good stuff there. And I also, just while we're here looking at the deck list, want to make note of that 1 copy of Mazemind Tome that Magni has. It's a really nice card. It reminds me a lot of the treasure map card from Rivals of Ixalan and Ixalan.
Yeah. Treasure map was awesome. That was an awesome Magic card for sure.
It's just one of those versatile cards. I mean, there it is in hand, that you never feel bad using up 1 spot in your deck for it. Like, oh yeah, this will probably be useful. A Scribe, maybe some life gain, card draw. Yeah, I like this. And it has the bonus of when you have Galazeth Prismari out, it can tap for spell mana.
That's very true. Because after all, the Galazeth does allow that. After all, artifacts gain the ability. Something I like about Mazemind Tome specifically is in the post-board games. Pre-board, it can be a little clunky and you're trying to do very specific things. But post-board, you're more likely to be kind of in this answer versus answer situation. And in those, Mazemind Tome becomes exceptional, because you essentially get to use it when nothing happens. And if something happens, you get to trade cards 1 for 1. And with both players low on resources, you then get to use it. So either way allows you to pull ahead. And I think that's also why we're going to see the shredded sales maybe from Corey, because, you just have to do it. Corey deciding to wait here to give Luca the
waiting for the Scry activation.
Yep, giving the least time to Luca, but Luca might just go, I don't need that. See, here's the thing. The problem is you set these stops, and Luca is realizing what might be going on here. Still decides to Scry. But I mean, to be fair, there was a big argument to just going like, you know what? My hand is spells, lands. I'm not sure 100% what I need to draw here. So I'm not going to activate it. I could just draw. So I'll just draw. And at that point, it would have looked really bad, right? Because then you get to trade your cash your Mazemind Tome in for a card. So that was not much seems to have happened there, but it was actually a really neat little interaction there. Like, Corey took a risk to make the card less effective.
And we're seeing a foretell happen there on Alrund's Epiphany, while the Volatile Fjord comes in. So that is a common land that is a snow land, comes in tapped, but you're seeing it played in all of these dragon lists because it allows for the Faceless Haven to be played so much more easily. Oh, and there's that red cap melee. Goodbye, Pyromancer. That is one less threat to worry about with a negate in hand. And eventually, if the game goes on long enough, Ugin. So you've got two very strong cards available to Luca Magni in the end game.
Yeah, pretty much exactly. And when you said it's the red cap melee, you did mean it. It was the red cap melee. There's one. So at this point,
only one. Yeah. More than one would be very helpful right here.
Yeah, so Corey here deciding not to play the second Pyromancer into what could be a saw it coming. Okay, if you don't hit the land, you don't get to cast it, but you do want the mana. And even you're taking a risk and playing a Flourishing Fox, which can easily be a dead card in this spot.
But with no burn removal available, Flourishing Fox is going to grow and grow and grow, hopefully unhindered by, I don't know, shocks or stomps or frostbites, anything of the sort. Yeah. And for people not familiar with the Flourishing Fox, it is a 1-mana 1/1. But every time you cycle, it grows a little bit bigger, getting those +1/+1 counters and becoming a really mighty threat.
Yeah. I do wonder here if Corey should have cycled on upkeep. It's not like you're not going to cycle, and if Luca draws a Bone Crusher Giant, then you get punished. Whereas if you do it on upkeep and there's a stomp, it just happens. Unless your plan was to not do it. But I think with Corey's hand, you do want to start cycling through, making this Fox large. So yeah, small interesting decisions here actually throughout the match.
So now Expressive Iteration is going to give the choice between 3 different cards. One goes in hand, one goes in exile and can be played or cast this turn, and the last one goes back into the deck.
Yeah, I'm going to go...
That's 2 lands and another Expressive Iteration.
I think there's 2 lines here. You can... A little surprised to see this one.
Just going purely for lands, trying to ramp up to those good cards, guaranteeing the land drops, throwing back the iteration.
No, I get it. Okay, so rather than putting the iteration in hand because you're not going to cast it in the gate, you just put it in exile because that way you get another land drop from this one potentially. Yeah, and the Frostbite's kind of bittersweet, right? Because you can get rid of the... Actually, yeah, no. This is good. You get to exile the Frostbite, and you get to get a red source here to get rid of this.
Get rid of the Fox on that second iteration.
Yeah. Those were good, and that's why that card can feel a lot more powerful than Divination. On top of the fact you're doing a bunch of stuff, it's also because it is 2 mana. So you don't with Divination often the problem is you have to kind of give up a lot of what your turn is, whereas in this scenario you don't.
Oh, I love Iteration. I feel like it's one of those fantastic cards for any kind of spell-based deck.
Yeah.
And here's the Epiphany, discounted by being foretold.
Yeah.
And now there's some birds out. And there's also another land in hand. You've got Bone Crusher Giant, Mystical Dispute, Negate. Still 1 mana off Ugin, but if next turn that Ugin resolves, it's going to be hard to deal with.
I mean, yeah.
Like, Corey does not have good ways to deal with Ugin. It's like a Zenith Flare or nothing.
That's very true. That said, the Ugin wouldn't be as backbreaking as it is in other spots because Corey didn't have the Improbable Alliance. This also showcases why Improbable Alliance is so good. What happens when you don't have it? It doesn't look as good. You have red cap melee. Like, in a pinch, if Ugin gets cast here, you get to essentially get rid of it. I'd be surprised even if a land was drawn that Ugin was cast because you have Mystical Dispute, so even waiting a turn would make sense to me.
So we could see the destruction of the Ironcrag Pyromancer here with a Frostbite and a Bone Crusher Giant.
Yep,
get rid of the threat.
The only question is when, but the thing is, you're going to want to cast this Bone Crusher Giant. So it makes sense to kind of do it here. Of course, from Corey's point of view, it's like, well, I could wait until it's played, but you're not getting your Ironcrag Pyromancer stomped here because it's going to survive.
I think we're going to see a double cycle in response to get that burn done before it's gone.
Yep. Might as well.
And here comes the Bone Crusher Giant. A nice little 4-3.
Yeah, and with two of the Pyromancers gone, it's a lot less likely that you get to kill it essentially for free. So at that point, you have Red Cap melee, but that leaves you very vulnerable to Gold Spam Dragon. That said, there wasn't one.
It's like, do you use this Red Cap melee on the Bone Crusher Giant, or do you wait to maybe trade it with your Rescuer or just keep blocking it with tokens?
Right. Like the Rescuer gets more value because you get to stop this Bone Crusher Giant. Whereas Red Cap melee is an efficient spell. Yeah. Actually, here, I wouldn't have been surprised if Corey would have loved an untapped land to just draw 4.
Oh, yeah, just Boon of the Wishgiver to, line up some options for the next few turns.
Yeah. Here you cycle the Boon because you can always cast the Starling Development to save your Valiant Rescuer.
Well, there's an Improbable Alliance, and there's a Mystical Dispute that can hit it, but Corey doesn't know that.
Right. The game has gone long, so it is likely that something like a Mystical Dispute might be in hand. Also, Ugin the Spirit Dragon with a land would be a disaster, but I think Corey's identifying, look, I need to make things happen. Now, from Luca's side, look, if you have an untapped land, this is the easiest resolve ever. You just let it resolve, you get the land, you play the Ugin, you're happy.
-2, Ugin, everybody's happy except for Corey, who has nothing on the board.
Right. But you have to look at it from the scenario, I think, where things don't go right because you're kind of in a slightly ahead from Luca's position. Now, here's the thing. Let's say the top card is an untapped land and you decide to counter this. Then you just get the plus and get rid of this Valiant Rescuer and have a Ugin at 9, which does, lose to a Zenith Flare, potentially. What's the cycling count in the deck? We have 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Yeah, so plus on Ugin, it would go down to a Zenith Flare. So you might -2 to get rid of the token anyways, but I like plussing here because you can always get to the -10 if things go right.
Yeah, and it also, it saves all of your Ugin's minus ability. Ugin, of course, is plus to deal 3 damage to any target. Minus is a kind of variable exile to the board. It only exiles colored permanents, but there are a lot of colored permanents to get rid of. And there's an ultimate ability, which is -10, which draws you 7 and lets you put, I think, up to 7 permanents from your hand onto the battlefield, as well as gaining you life.
Yeah, it's like draw 7, put up to 7 permanents from your hand into play into the battlefield, and draw 7, gain 7, and then you can put 7 cards from your hand.
A resolved Ugin is very hard to deal with, and we see Corey dealing with that right now.
Yep. The only card that could do it is a Zenith Flare. Needed to be drawn that turn because you had the negate backup. Without it, I just don't see. The problem is Corey's going to think about it. You probably don't. You could Red Cap melee it. I don't think you're being Ugin's ultimate ever. And I do mean ever.
You do have to sacrifice a land, but I mean that plains isn't necessary. Get rid of that.
Yeah, or one of these infinite pathways or whatever. Luca's going to -10. Oh, okay, yeah, you do it on upkeep to fight through the mana. I like this. Yeah, well, I know. Had the counter spell ready, but was just like, sacrifice the Triumph? Wait, what?
We didn't see a negate there.
Yeah. What would we sack? Okay, it's fine. It's not going to matter in this game. Oh, right. Okay. Okay. So when something weird happens, always question why. What's going on? There's actually a really good reason to sacrifice the Trio. which is that it makes Zenith Flare a little bit better.
Yeah, I think this is maybe just trying to go for the OTK. Keep
Maybe,
on cycling and aim to get 19 on that Zenith Flare with a negate held up to protect it. And that Zenith Flare is at 16. It is almost there.
So that, yeah, and you could play Red Cap Melee to get it up as well. How much mana do we have? 4, 5, 6, 7. I think here you're supposed to pass if you're in Corey's seat and cycle end of turn, and then on your turn next turn, do the Zenith Flare. If you think there's a counter spell in Luca Magni's hand. Because at this point, if Zenith Flare was a little smaller, I would just go after the Sugan. But at 16, it becomes really tempting to just aim it at, just wait a bit and try to aim it at Luca.
I know, but with that negate in hand, it's like, ooh, I could protect this. They would need 2 counter spells as long as Ugin doesn't ult. Just need a little bit more in the graveyard. Yeah.
Really heads up from Corey to actually sacrifice the Triumph. I think most players wouldn't even spot that. And it might be extremely relevant in this match.
But it's so nice. It goes to the graveyard. It's actually part of why Ugin can be so annoying in this matchup, is if Ugin's over here just like, ooh, I'm going to go ahead and exile your cards from the board. And those cards had cycling. You wanted them to die. And, are we going to see another Red Cap Melee sacrificing the Triome?
We are, but it's going to be 18. It still gives Corey time, and you have 2 negates, but you don't have enough mana for both of those because you have to sack your lands. Yeah, I mean, you have free turns, right? Yeah, I mean, you gotta hope Luca doesn't draw another counterspell. Or a dragon here is 1 turn.
Yeah, it's 4 damage plus 3 damage off the Ugin. 7's dragon's worth of damage.
It's kind of tight here. In terms of the damage race. You could hope to draw 1 mana cycler. I think because you gain 18 when it resolves, you might as well draw. Oh man, that is the that is the most interesting possible card to draw, because if you cycle this, wondering, does Luca have a counter? You're trying to get an untapped land here.
You have to get an untapped land. And there it is. There is a Needle Verge pathway allowing for the Zenith Flare and the gate to be held up here. Lots of mana. When do you do it? How about right now? Go for lethal, go for broke, hit the face with the Zenith Flare. Oh, and then a negate? I have one of those too.
That was a super sweet game.
That is exactly
even Luke is clapping like, wow.
The game. Okay. That's so beautiful.
Yeah, just the sacrificing the triomes and all that.
And the BM, I'm just going to frostbite my own dragon for a little bit more treasure. Incredible work.